Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or something. It's evening. Yeah, 7:40. It's definitely evening. All right, so I'm gonna put on a kind of timer. Alrighty, so thank you so much for Codjoe and Ama. Thank you. Oh, man, I'm very glad for Ama. I'm so excited that she asked me to read this introduction and to also get to meet sort of a little bit more formally Carl Phillips and Shane McCrae. Like, that was really dope. So yeah, let me just get into it. So I was writing and I had an intro, and then it just it kind of grew and grew. So I'm gonna definitely stop at a certain point. But introduction for poet Ama Codjoe. And I wrote it into 3 parts, so I guess this first part is called Water. In Gaston Bachelard's introduction to his book, Water and Dreams, an essay on the imagination of matter, he spits some fire saying, if a reader can be convinced that there is, under the superficial imagery of water, a series of progressively deeper and more tenacious images, he will soon develop a feeling for this penetration in his own contemplations. He will recognize in water, in its substance, a type of intimacy that is very different from those suggested by the depths of fire or rock. Water is truly the transitory element. It is the essential ontological metamorphosis between fire and earth. A being dedicated to water is a being in flux. I personally don't care much for the poetic discussion of the speaker in a poem, and that's probably forms of naivete, and I think if you use the idea of the speaker, it's based on intention as opposed to thinking that it's automatically there. But discussion of the speaker in a poem, but Codjoe makes it relevant, necessary, in the ways the individual speaker determines for themselves how they will navigate, inhabit, or negotiate with the body. Codjoe speaks fluidly to herself, through herself, and I admire this approach to intimacy. In her poem, Lotioning My Mother's Back, Codjoe sees her mother circling her own mother, who is made of whatever makes a shadow thin and ungraspable. She wants to touch her, the bones under my mother's skin. So not only is the daughter trying to touch the mother, but the mother attempts to touch the daughter through her daughter. It is impossible to draw a self-portrait without the other women figured onto my flesh like barnacles fixed to a gray whale. Codjoe writes this in the title poem, Bluest Nude, and we see all of them: grandmother, mother, auntie, the artists Lorna Simpson, Deanna Lawson, the 3 Bettys, Betty Saar, Betty Davis, Betty from Betty and Veronica. The lead speaker calls out to these prominent figures throughout the book as a way of discussing the sense of touch and intimacy on a beautiful level. Through I am touching the photograph of my last seduction, to longing to touch a painting, to it is narrow and soft, my mother's back, when I massage in small circles, my mother circles her own mother, to sexual assault, to what we can place in the ground is no more now a man, but a seed, to see how touch and intimacy face a variety of problems and puzzles to solve. Imagine, like we all do, each day infinitely, grasping for water, for memory. Obad and synsex, it was the close, I was trying to make a pun between syntax and sex, but synsex and Obad, it was my best try. Here we go. Ama Codjoe in her Obad, and also as Obeyed, Obad goes, he shook like a startled fish caught in a great blue heron's beak. Yes, a woman of my kind has seen the sea. Those who are familiar with Anne Sexton will hear the nod to her poem, Her Kind. And if we think about all of the natural elements, we'll see that Sexton uses images of air, possessed witch haunting the black air, and then earth, warm cave in the woods, and fixed the supper for the worms and the elves, and lastly fire, survivor, where your flames still bite my thigh. But Codjoe completes the missing element. Sexton may have had her own reasons for omitting water. With her, yes, a woman of my kind has seen the sea. On the flip side, we have Philip B. Williams in his final poem as Nocturne into Obad or Sunrise, using both Obad and a bear to explore the movements of the body. He parts my legs to gift, my hairiest part yawns like a waking bear. Y'all, I'm just like, that line was like crazy to me. My hairiest part yawns like a waking bear. I was like, mind blown. But bear, 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 and bear, she uses bear a lot in her poems as well. In both cases, we have what sounds like homophones, but we also got homonyms, each word carrying separate identities. I think Codjoe uses the word bear a few times in the book, but I came to realize just how intentional each verb was in a poem. In the ways that it allows us to not only understand what is happening, but if we are really sensitive, we get to feel the words at work, transitioning into memories manifested. In Of Being in Motion, Codjoe admits, I accumulate bodies, my own. And who else should we turn but to Carl Phillips himself, that syntactician who wrote in the book Coin of the Realm in his chapter Association and Poetry, meditating on Frank O'Hara's The Day Lady Died. The method in O'Hara's poem, we'll call it cumulative. The poem ends up being a list of actions, sequential, but finally only a fragment of narrative. The danger, however, is that in the course of saying, I'm doing A, B, Q, I'm considering Z, in the course of this, we risk writing what amounts to a personal anecdote, to which the reader might well ask, who cares? But isn't a pleasure of writing precisely in the taking of risks, pushing them and managing to survive them? And I'm like coming to a close. I almost wrote a whole essay, but I'm gonna like come back to this. I basically made a whole like a list of images of like how Ama's work relates, or at least manifests in my body in terms of like how looking at the past and using memory as a way, and using the body as a lens for memory. So I'm gonna briefly say that Roland Barthes in his book Camera Lucida mentions him exploring photography not as a question, a theme, but as a wound. I see, I feel, hence I notice, I observe, and I think. And in her sequence of poems that begin after the blank, she says her mother's scar is a mark, the color of time. I am my mother's weeping wound. The first and the only time I've heard her use the word wound in the book. In her poem, Detail from Poem After Betty Saar, The Liberation of Aunt Jemima, it ends where it says, and 4 women flying without shoes or wings from her maternal amber body. She hardly envisions herself as anything other than herself. Metaphor is left for the others. And I realized this from a poem in Blood of the Air, her chapbook, which the title poem is a numbered sonnet recalling Zeus and Leda. And I think I'm just gonna leave that for another time, but I think it's just what I wanted to say here is that what has happened to the reader was no myth. But knowing that the poem and then seeing the figure of the swan, of Zeus turning into a swan, and seeing these other masculine figures in her book transform, we kind of like noticed like this shift of the masculine transforming, and then the feminine kind of like in its own state is so powerful enough to draw the masculine, but then we have a lot of like these conflicting scenes for both pleasure, for both violence, and for a lot of other experiences that I'm sure plenty of us in this room will be able to resonate with. So I definitely wish you luck in terms of like experiencing this work by Ama Codjoe.
Thank you, Nkosi. Thank you for reading so deeply and carefully. Hi, everybody. So thanks to Ricky for the invitation, to the folks at 92nd Street Y, to Carl Phillips, whose work is incredible and meaningful to me. I'm gonna start with Marigolds of Fire. 1. He had a caribou's face. Once he let me lick the sadness there. It tasted of salt and moss-covered rocks. He grew the beard of a mountain goat. He scaled the face of a mountain. Lying beside him, I stared into the face of faceless waters whose velvet antlers cradled us. He wore a bison's face. Sometimes he wallowed in the dust, tossing his head from side to side, wearing deep grooves into the braided rug. Mornings he refused to betray his dreams. He wore an antelope's face. I could go on like this. I liked how he led me, almost a shove, how he kissed me, mercy, how I kissed him back, my back against the foyer wall. Sometimes we called to each other like birds. It wasn't ritual. How can I explain? He laced his fingers, made his knees a ladder. I braced myself on his backward horns. I climbed him then into the tree. 2. In the end, we were delivered back to the strange mud from which we crawled. The bed gave us back, unastonished, our aching, separate bodies. This is skin, it told us. Skin, I wrote. I would commit its meaning to memory. 3. A football player slaps the butt of a passing girl. She turns to face a silvered hand dangling from each player's wrist. Windless chimes. Under their helmets, the teammates wear the same blank face. Can I tell you I wanted them all? 4. In the beginning, there was blood or the threat of blood. Formed from clay, we sought a fire that could finish us. We sewed a garland of marigolds. We ate good blossoms whole. 5. He takes his coffee with cream and sugar. She takes it black. She scans her wardrobe for a dress. They respond to emails and tidy their desks. At 4 a.m., the garbage truck jostles her awake. He sleeps best on his side, on his back, on his belly. He calls her lady. Though before she'd wince at this term of endearment, she hears the word babe slip out of her. It slips out of her mouth. His eyes are tired. She has bags under her eyes. She waters the cactus in a slip. The sky turns stormy. He forgets the umbrella. She wants to storm out. He believes she'll leave. He forgets to call. She calls him a name. She takes it back. He takes it black. No, sugar. He's confused. He wants a baby. She winces. They rub their eyes. It was a slip, a mistake. He packs his bags. She irons a sky blue dress. She can't stand his silences, the way he slips in and out of her. The phone was on silent. The ringer was off. She removes the ring from the tub. He sleeps on the couch on his side. The sky is a bath of coffee grounds. Her face is full of clouds. His eye waters. Somewhere near a marsh, there's a starling roosting. I'm saying the middle was filled with the end. Labor, Manhattan, New York. The Upper West Side brims with black women heaving bugaboo strollers as if maneuvering horseless plows. I'm walking up Broadway with a white friend whose mother's food stamps we used as kids to buy sour straws, barbecue chips, and frosted pints of Cherry Garcia. While we zigzag between pedestrians, she argues that there may be as many white working-class nannies steering double-wide strollers as black. It's hard to tell, she insists, whether the white women caring for white babies are laborers or mothers. I know we use the same word to describe work and the work of giving birth. Still, I'm tempted to call her bluff. Today, I do not want children. I recall instances when I've been mistaken for mother, like last May when a man clutching a fistful of blush roses wished me happy Mother's Day, or in a muggy subway car as a child beside me rested his head on my arm. A nearby passenger's eyes softened at our portrait. I claimed the sleeping child then. Briefly, I claimed him. More than once, I've held tightly the hands of my twin nephews who could be confused for each other or as mine. Together, we've waited near the chasm of the street, gusts of cars stealing their reflections. I've spent hours, brief minutes, tending to children I in no way labored for. And then, with some relief, I have let them go. How are y'all doing? Thank you. Thanks. It's good to be in poetry. So, I have some poems that Nkosi mentioned. I think of them now as the after poems. And some of them have a blank that I'm inviting the reader to fill in, so I'll just pause at that blank. After I mothered my mother, became grandmother to myself, distant and tender, temples turning gray. The whole world cascaded past my shoulders, like the hair self-hatred taught me to crave, though all my Barbie dolls were black. And the Cabbage Patch Kid my grandmother placed under the artificial Christmas tree, sprinkled with tinsel in Memphis, Tennessee, the city where my mother waited for her first pair of glasses in the colored-only waiting room. She said the world changed from black and white to Technicolor that day. My mother watches TV as I roll her hair. She sits between my legs. I've never birthed a child. I have fondled the crown of a lover's head, my thighs framing his dark brown eyes. I entered the world excised from my mother's womb. Her scar is a mark the color of time. I am my mother's weeping wound. On my last birthday, I cried into bathwater. I hid my tears from my mother because that's what mothers do. After time turned like a mood ring. My mood changed like a thunderstruck sky. The sky changed like a breast engorged, staining the front of a white silk blouse. I got laid off. I went 13 days without wearing a bra. I changed my mind about the fiction of money. Money changed hands. I washed my hands religiously. Religion changed into sunlight, something allowed to touch my face. My face changed into my mother's. No, into a mask of my mother's face. Traces of heartache changed into a pain in my right hip. The stock market dipped. The S&P fell freely. I did not fall to my knees, promising to change my life. The price of paper towels changed, and the price of toilet paper, and the price of white bread and milk. Whiteness did not change. Some things stayed the same. We named the moon for its changes, but it remained the same. Gravity pulled at my organs like the moon's tug makes a king tide. America's king would inevitably change and inevitably stay the same. All right. Thank you. Alice Quinn, who's here, asked at the very beginning of the pandemic if I had a poem, which I usually don't have poems about things that are happening right at the moment, but it so happened that I quarantined in my mom's house for like 14 days. And I was writing to kind of get through that moment that we can all recall, which was just like, we had no idea what was going on. And New York felt very apocalyptic. So I'm gonna take a break. I've been trying to bring in other voices if I have enough time in a reading. And my rule for myself is that I will be sharing what I'm reading now. I happen to now be reading Carl Phillips. So I'm not gonna share Carl's work because Carl is here. But I did share this sonnet by Gwendolyn Brooks a couple weeks ago and to up the ante for myself, I've memorized it, so I'm gonna share that with you guys. It's called My Dreams, My Works Must Wait Till After Hell. I hold my honey and I store my bread in little jars and cabinets of my will. I label clearly, and each latch and lid I bid be firm till I return from hell. I am very hungry. I am incomplete, and none can tell when I may dine again. No man can give me any word but wait, the puny light. I keep eyes pointed in, hoping that when the devil days of my hurt drag out their last dregs, and I resume on such legs as are left me, and such heart as I can manage, remember to go home. My taste will not have turned insensitive to honey and bread old purity could love. So good. So good. And all those clauses, just like Carl. Okay, I'm gonna read one poem and then a long poem. A family woven like night through trees. A man asks, "Do you have a family?" My thinking brushes the air between us like a wet mark stains white paper. My mother's mother, dead 22 years. A stone house, the ants I've killed. Robin who, when someone hurls toward me a small cruelty, cries. Memphis, in August, my twin brother crunching ice. All the cousins I've made walking amongst cedar trees. New Yorkers on New Year's Day or on the first day of spring, not children I've birthed, but dead leaves raked into prickly hills made messy with our falling. Artists skinny dipping in the ocean at night. It was family that surged and fell away. But the ties my grandfather wore on Sundays are kite tails in my closet. The mums my mother planted are tiny decadent flames. Family returns like a sun, the way a wave is always and never the same. For once, it is not about the body. I listened as my friend's urge to kill herself grew clamorous as a field of bells. She stank of it. Her voice reeked, streaked with ringing, and as if she were wreathed in baby's breath, cloaked in a robe of dianthus, as if she'd been washed by a river stripped of silt and mud, I drew her close, inhaled her musk, and brought her brow to mine. I mean to say, her blood was mine. Thank you. So I'm going to read the title poem, which is quite long. Bluest Nude. 1. When my mother was pregnant, she drove every night to the Gulf of Mexico, leaving her keys and a towel on the shore. She waded into the surf, floating naked on her back, turquoise waves hemming her ears. She allowed the water to do the carrying. It isn't true. My mother lived hours inland, and her doctor prescribed bed rest. I want her to be weightless, belly up and moonlit, or filling a bathtub with hot water and stepping gingerly so as not to slip, easing herself into the cramped tub, rimmed with dirt from her husband and son, soaking for as many minutes as she could, savoring the water as it turned cold. 2. In the news, there was another incident. If I describe how the officer treated the young woman's body, I am also describing the color of her body. Let me refuse simile. I do not wish to write it. 3. And the flower of my body blossoms, belonging at last to me, sovereign place where I am no one but myself, peony and cracked vase, weeping beach and spiraled shell, siren, matron, Jezebel. A rush of bees enters me, and I am not stung. Petals unfold in night's bluest hymn. 4. The blue swimming pool, the blue in a record's groove revolving, the pink hydrangea turned powder blue, glory of the snow blue, blue-black blue, the blue of a bruise, wild blueberry blue, the blue you pick, the blue you choose, the blue that bucks us like a bull, the blue bowl full of lilacs, the blue that falls as tufts of hair from the barber's chair, the blue sun makes, the blue shade of a yellow pine, television blue, cadmium blue, blue twisted into the spools of your DNA, forking into 2 directions, blue darkening your knees, the blue you miss because, though it almost killed you, blue was, for a season, your home. 5. There was another incident. If I describe how the officer treated the young woman's body, I am also describing the color of my body. 6. Then the last piece, a solemn veil lifted and tossed to the floor. I know the history of my body is a pair of hacked-off hands playing the piano. Day after day in the artist's studio, I smell the melon's ripe decay. I draw a second body, then a third, and so on. My bodies reveal nothing and conceal nothing. Pin-up beauty, runaway, Venus of the circus act, night walker, wet nurse, odalisque, reclining nude. The women are me and are not only me. Ours are the only eyes. We construct our seeing as clay or wood into figurines of air. We perceive their shapes and uses just as wind is seen by watching leaves. These are the paintings I make of myself. Art is drawn on the cave of my body. There are as many walls inside me as there are bones at the bottom of the sea. It matters little how small I am in the pool of another's eye. It's awe or indifference I crave. I want to be seen clearly or not at all. The moon is an eye, flung open, useless without a pupil. It soothes me, this not seeing. Painters have gone blind staring at the sun. At the center of a hurricane is an eye in the midst of which one believes the storm is over. A woman's face can break, fall as quickly as night. Sometimes when I cry, all of the eyes which are mine, painted, sketched, photograph, begin to shed blue tears. I catch them with my hands or with pots and pans, or let them fall as drifts of snow. I eat them by the fistful. When you look at me in our most intimate exchanges, you drape my nakedness in a fabric I neither sewed nor bought. You pin my beauty with a tack against the wall, or me against a 4-poster bed, thighs splayed, nipples spilling spoiled milk. In every light, the fact of history strips me blue. These are the conditions. The point is to go on. Drawing myself as water from a well, I can no longer believe in an innocence that was never mine. It is impossible to draw a self-portrait without the other women figured onto my flesh like barnacles fixed to a gray whale. I am rough to touch. I am the yellow song of a blue pain. The women and I walk a tightrope of night. Our eyes adjust to growing darkness. We make of our vision knowingness. It's love the women and I make. Love fashions our sight. We drink from the waters that were once snow. We are quenched and we are thirsty. Thank you.
Hi, y'all. I'm Shane. So thank you, Ricky and Carl, and I will just jump into this. Hopefully, if you love poetry, you're eager to discover poets. Each poet you discover is a channel for further communications from the beloved. Often, however, the poets one discovers strike one as not particularly memorable, and it is always true that the beloved also speaks elsewhere. And so one forgets most of one's first encounters with poets. But I remember where I was when I first read Carl Phillips. I was in the Walden Books in Lancaster Mall in Salem, Oregon. I had just turned 20 years old. The book was Phillips' second, Cortage. And in case you're wondering, Phillips would have been a heart-stopping 11 years younger than I am now. If I recall correctly, Walden Books was dominated at the time by new release fiction, most of which was stuffed alongside a few Penguin classics into a section labeled, confusingly, literature. This section filled the left-hand wall of the store. At the end of the literature section, almost as far from the door as one could get, was the extremely narrow section set aside for poetry, which featured a surprising number of self-published local authors and even more major releases by major presses. A semi-literate high school dropout, all I knew about presses back then was that Knopf seemed like a big one. After scanning most of the section, I spotted Cortage and slid it off the shelf, since I had never heard of Phillips before, nor had I ever seen the word cortage, and I was eager for further communication from the beloved. I flipped the book open, and before I read it, I should point out it's a single sentence. This is what the beloved said to me. Think of any of several arched colonnades to a cathedral, how the arches, like fountains, say, are certain limits in calculus, when put to the graph paper's cross trees, never quite meet any promised heaven. Instead, at their vaulted heights, falling down to the abruptly ending base of the next column, smaller, the one smaller past that, at last dying, what is called perspective. Well, you know, I hadn't even started community college yet. I wouldn't for another year, and I wasn't ready for what I was reading, and had no idea what I was reading, nor did I have a job, nor any money, really. So I bought the book and didn't buy an Orange Julius and whatever else, whatever trifle, maybe lunch, I might have bought, and by now would have forgotten. I mean, you heard that sentence, right? Already in his second book, Phillips sounds like no other poet, but he also sounds the way every major new voice sounds. He sounds like a fulfillment of poetry itself. Reading Carl Phillips for the first time, I felt, as if all the poetry one has read before had been missing precisely what the Carl Phillips poem, its particular sinuousness, provides. Because that's what a major new voice does. It both fulfills and suspends the laws of poetry. In the lines I just read, particularly in these lines, instead, at their vaulted heights, falling down to the abruptly ending base of the next column, smaller, the one smaller past that, at last dying. In those lines, one recognizes the fulfillment of the law in the beauty of the music, and the suspension of the law in the quality the syntax has of seeming to run away from the sentence of which it is a part. Speaking of syntax, with a personal significance only matched by a few other books, Susan Howe's The Nonconformist's Memorial, the novels of Samuel Beckett and Nicholas Mosley, The Everything of Gertrude Stein, Cortage invented syntax for me and changed my conception of the sentence. Before I read Cortage, although I couldn't have articulated this then, I thought of sentences as resting places, benches upon which ideas might sit, sometimes even hotel rooms in which ideas might briefly stay. But in Cortage, and even more so in the work that has followed it, sentences become gatherings, not benches, not even rooms, nothing outfitted for the accommodation of some outside thing, but collective organisms, gatherings through which ideas glide in a collective voice that, because of the overlapping of its constituent parts, sounds like singing and is singing. I had said a lifetime of words before I read Cortage, but I could not have spoken. The writing of poetry is a service industry. A great poet doesn't merely invent their audience, they reinvent their readers, one by one. It is much too small a thing to say poets nourish our souls. Poets make possible the hunger, which is bigger than whatever ephemeral thing nourishes it, and both repeatedly reborn and immortal. Hopefully, if you love poetry, you will be reinvented many times during your lifetime. Hopefully, if you love poetry, you are eager to be reinvented, because here tonight, Carl Phillips will reinvent you. Here's Phillips' official bio, adapted slightly from his Washington University in St. Louis faculty website. Carl Phillips is the author of 16 books of poetry, most recently Then the War, published by FSG in 2022. Other books include The Tether, winner of the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, and Double Shadow, winner of the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. His prose books are My Trade is Mystery, 7 Meditations from a Life in Writing, The Art of Daring, Risk, Restlessness, Imagination, and Coin of the Realm, Essays on the Life and Art of Poetry. And he has translated Sophocles' Philoctetes. A finalist for both the National Book Award and the National Books Critics Circle Award. His other honors include the Jackson Poetry Prize, Lambda Literary Award, an award in literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the Theodore Roethke Memorial Foundation Poetry Award, the Tom Gunn Award for Gay Male Poetry, and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Library of Congress, and the Academy of American Poets, for which he served as Chancellor from 2006 to 2012. Please join me in welcoming Carl Phillips.
Thank you, Shane, for that very overwhelming introduction. And thank you, Amma, for your stunning reading. And thank you, Ricky, for inviting us to do this together, and everyone else at the Y who's been terrific. Sophie, Bernard, I don't know, everyone. All right, so it says in big letters here, time. Notice the time you started. And so I have duly done so. Okay, so this is called The Darker Powers. Even if you're right, and there's in fact a difference between trouble unlooked for and the kind of trouble we pursued ruthlessly until at last it was ours, what will the difference have been finally? What I've called the world continues to pass for one. The room spins, same as ever. The bodies inside it do, flightless, but no less addicted to mastering, to the dream of mastering, the very boughs through which they keep falling without motion almost, that slowly it seems they'll fall forever, my pretty consorts, to whom sometimes, out of pity, not mercy, for nothing tender about it, I show the darker powers I've hardly shown to anyone. Feel the weight of them, I say, before putting them back, just behind my heart, where they blacken and thrive. This poem is, what? Like that? How's that? Electric. It's a calm night, the kind of calm inside which, hours after having entered another's body with your own body, you wonder, did that happen? Any of it? And then the staggering away home from it, as from a crime scene, or the grottoed site of some miracle believed in by enough pilgrims to make it seem almost true. It's as if the calm contains the night, which contains the fears that only exist finally inside you. Each fear being different, each contains its own dream. Is dream the word? Vision, maybe? Except invisible, the way certain gestures are. the gesture of sorrow when it shifts the way a storm shifts to something easier to bear than sorrow. A hawk tearing not so slowly at a smaller bird that's still breathing. A man thinking that by withdrawing from the conversation, he's taken control of the conversation. I've known more than a few men like that. Sex in colors. Names like believe me or don't, whatever. Tattoos like dangerous and don't disturb. And it's a long life if you're lucky. And you were right all along. It was love. And I wish you more time. And when they most needed bandaging, he covered my eyes, the skin of his hands, like deerskin. There's a reference to the Iliad, but don't be upset. You don't have to have read it or anything. This is called Something to Believe in. My 2 hunting dogs have names, but I rarely use them. As I go, they go. I lead, they follow. The blue-eyed one first, then the one who's coloring her coat, not her eyes, I sometimes call never again, oh, never this way, henceforth. Hope, ambition, these are not their names, though the way they run might suggest otherwise. Like steam off night-soaked wooden fencing when the sun first hits it, they rise each morning at my command. Late in the Iliad, Priam, the king of Troy, predicts his own murder, correctly, except it won't be by spear, as he imagines, but by sword thrust. He can see his corpse, sees the dogs he's fed and trained so patiently pulling the corpse apart. After that, he says, when they're full, they'll lie in the doorway. They'll lap my blood. I say, why shouldn't they? Everywhere, the same people who mistake obedience for loyalty think somehow loyalty weighs more than hunger, when it doesn't. At night, when it's time for bed, we sleep together, the 3 of us, muscled animal, muscled animal, muscled animal. The dogs settle to either side of me, as if each were the slightly folded wing of a beast from fable, part power, part recognition. We breathe in a loose kind of unison. Our breathing ripples the way oblivion does, routinely, across history's face. My partner doesn't like that I seem to have turned him into a dog in that poem. He said, we don't have 2 dogs. And I was like, it's a poem. It's a poem. Use your imagination. This is a poem called Mirror, Window, Mirror. And like the title, it's in 3 parts. They're pretty short, though. Yes, any sky at night, when the flickering of snow lightning gently punctuates it, whatever it is, when it's not bewilderment or daring, and not fear either, also the mottled bark of sycamores in autumn for where the skin was like that, yes. But more like arousal? Or more instead like the mind just before the idea of arousal courses bluntly through it? That part about the body asking for it, to be broken into. Is that the first or last part? I don't know. It's hard to say. It's best to end the poem. This poem is called Storm. From the waist down, at least, nothing unfamiliar. Cypress trees, the catalpa, its seed pods hanging like shadow icicles, and the light around them, and the bodies that enter the light and leave it, your own among them, but as when the body seems most to want impossibly to step free of itself, oblivion of wish, of wishing. About sanctuary, how over time it makes the birds come closer, how that's different from trust, isn't it? What the fuck do you think you're looking at? He says softly. What a thing to say. The mind protecting itself by shutting down an intimacy that most likely won't be returned. Why expect it? As if that were the mind's chief purpose, to resist a fall, though falling's what the body does best, is quick to rise for. Moving toward you with all the ceremony of many wings at once outspread, a holiday descending. The dark adjusts itself, settles its wings inside you. The shadows that strut the dark open and fold like hope, a paper fan, violence in its pitch and fall like waves above them, the usual seabirds, their presumable indifference to chance, its blonde convergences. As when telling cruelty apart from chivalry can come to seem irrelevant or not anymore the main point. He touches himself here and here, directive, turns his face away. It can look like ransom. Now it looks like privilege, now recklessness, now triumph, gravel and blood, humiliation, lovely, now strict refrain. He taketh my hand in his. It's hard to think that that was actually just a harmless picnic on the banks of the Missouri River, but then things kind of take a turn. Yes, this is called We Turn Here. If we don't have to bring honesty into this, why bring it? Or that's at least what I think the question was, though what I more remember is how it kept breaking. The question did, the way waves do, touching shore. One, that I shall be punished. Two, that this is not yet the punishment. Each wave eventually indistinguishable from the wave before. Isn't that what you think waves are saying when they're coming and going? You know, one, that I shall be punished. Two, this is not yet the punishment. That's what I hear. Perhaps it's just me. Perhaps that's why I'm often alone on the beach. Dominion. Sometimes I take the leather hood off. I refuse to wear it, as if I were king or a man who's free. Ravens, red-tailed hawks, the usual flocks of drifting, most of the time strangers, settle the way even things that drift have to. And I don't care. All over again, I know things that nobody knows or wants to. Things that, though prettier maybe against the snow of memory, can still hurt all the same. Any blame falling where it falls, that random, that moment each day when the light traveling across what's always been mine to at any point take back or give elsewhere, becomes just the light again, turning back to dark, when the branches stir as they've stirred forever, more tenderly over some of us than others. Sing or don't sing. Help me take this leather hood off. I refuse to wear it. I'm the king. I'm free. I don't always have poems with titles like this. I know that last one was called Dominion, and now this one is called Civilization. But it just happens to be the case. It was a phase, I think. And yeah, that's what it's called. Civilization. There's an art to everything. How the rain means April and an ongoingness like that of song until at last it ends. A centuries-old set of silver handbells that once an altar boy swung, processing. You're the same wilderness you've always been, slashing through briars, the bracken of your invasive self. So he said, in a dream. But the rest of it, all the rest, was waking, more often than not to the next extravagance. 2 blackamoor statues, each mirroring the other, each hoisting forever upward his burden of hand-painted, carved by hand peacock feathers. Don't you know it? Don't you know I love you? He said. He was shaking. He said, I love you. There's an art to everything. What I've done with this life, what I'd meant not to do, or would have meant, maybe, had I understood, though I have no regrets. Not the broken but still flowering dogwood, not the honey locust either, not even the ghost walnut with its non-branches whose every shadow is memory, memory. As he said to me once, that's all garbage down the river now, turning, but as the utterly lost, because addicted, do, resigned all over again. It only looked, it must only look like leaving. There's an art to everything, even turning away. How eventually even hunger can become a space to live in. How they made out of shamelessness something beautiful, for as long as they could. It always sounds like rain in the distance. This is called Gold Leaf. It is, I like to point out, it is one long extended infinitive fragment, or bunch of infinitive fragments, contrary to what a noted reviewer said about it being a sentence. At which point I dismissed the review. Gold leaf. To lift without ever asking what animal exactly it once belonged to, the socketed helmet that what's left of the skull equals, up to your face. To hold it there, mask-like. To look through it until looking through means looking back, back through the skull, into the self that is partly the animal you've always wanted to be, that, depending, fear has prevented or rescued you from becoming. To know utterly what you'll never be. To understand in doing so what you are, and say no to it, not to who you are. To say no to despair. This poem is a little newer. It's called Fist and Palm. Fist and Palm. There are plenty who'd hardly recognize me now. I used to be that cruel, by which I mean I was frightened mostly, and now I'm mostly not. Joy, if only flickeringly, each day astounds me. The man I used to be dismounts, relents for a bit, before digging his boots, streaked with longing, my own longing, what I can't help, hard into my sides again, into the man I've become. His way of reminding me we've only stopped for rest, a short rest, some water. We've years to go still. He has his job. I have mine. Speechlessness is not an option, he whispers into my ear. He spits on the words themselves after. as if to make them stay, or just to make sure I'm listening. But I'm always listening, as I always obey. Isn't this obedience? These songs I've built from things too difficult to speak of. Okay, and I just have 2 more poems. One is breathtakingly short. Breathtakingly. The title comes from a poem, a line from a poem, The Minx by Toy Derricotte. The title of the poem is Of the Shining Underlife. Above me, the branches toss toward and away from each other, the way privacy does with what ends up showing, despite ourselves, of who we are inside. Then there are branches again. Hickory, I think. It's not too late then. Breathtaking. And I'm going to end with this poem called Defiance. The Iliad is back. But again, was that so bad when the Iliad occurred? No, you didn't have to have read it. The information was given you in the poem. You didn't have to be made to feel stupid. I know the kind of poem you're thinking of. I don't write that kind. This is called Defiance. Some say the point of war is to make the need for tenderness more clear. Some say that's an effect of war, the way beauty can be. Homer's Iliad, for example. Or, many centuries later, how the horse's head, to protect it in combat, would be fitted with a chafron, a strip of steel, sometimes mixed with copper, all of it hammer-worked, parts detailed in gold. I love you, as I've always loved you, one man says, meaning it to another. That doesn't make love true. This only needs to be troubling if we want it to be. Our minds are as the days are, dark or bright, says Homer, the words like coral bells in a pot made to look like the head of an ancient god, a sea god, moss for seaweed across the old god's face. To believe in ritual in the name of hope, there lies disaster. And turned to him and took his hand, the scarred one. I could feel the scars, little crowns, mass coronation. For by then, all the lilies on the pond had opened. Thank you very much. Thanks.